Well, let's go and get started. So, Brady, we had first of all, I want to thank you on behalf of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program for taking time out of your schedule to be with us. It means a lot to me that you're willing to be interviewed. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
And I know you had a long trip, so we'll try to make it. We won't go too long. But I wonder if we could start by, if you wouldn't mind, telling me a little bit about your background, your family background, kind of before the case. And then did you have, was lawyering in your family? Was that part of did you have lawyers who kind of inspired you early on, or, things like that?
Okay. Well, I'm a native Texan. However, my stepfather moved to New York when I was 9, so I grew up in New York, and they moved back to Texas when I was 20. So I went to the University of Texas, then went to UT Law School, and was sort of straight. I went with the AG's office, and then I practiced straight, just regular trial law. I wanted to be a trial lawyer. And then along about the mid 60s, I started. I'm 76 years old, so I'm too young for Korea, too old for Vietnam as far as being involved. But in the 60s, I started moving further and further to the left and joined Cam Cunningham and Jim Simons in Austin. And we were the radical law firm in Austin. So before the Gainesville, before the indictments, we represented John Kniffin and Bill Patterson, who were two of the defendants, and they were the Texan defendants. And Nancy and I have talked about this on which law firm came in first and how this happened, and Scott probably knows better than either one of us. But we were the Texas connection.
Okay.
Because we had represented John and Bill in Texas. So when the indictments came down, we became part of the legal team. So we started traveling to Gainesville and the grand jury and the whole business.
Wow.
And and that's how we got involved. Was through those two defendants.
Okay. Come here. Did your I mean, how did you become a lawyer? I mean, what was that process? Was that something? Were either your parents involved in the law, or did you?
Not really. I in undergraduate school, I was. It was the '50s, and it was Eisenhower and Elvis, and I was not really into, certainly not politics.
Yeah.
But I loved Austin, and I wanted to stay there. A lot of my contemporaries that were older were going into the law. I had been an athlete. I liked to compete, and the trial room seemed like a good place to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to law school, and I wanted to be a trial lawyer, and I was. And eventually, it took me into the more radical side of it.
Did you have role models? People that you looked up to in terms of
Clarence
the law.
Darrow, yeah.
Okay, Clarence
Yeah,
Darrow.
yeah.
So, did you read things like Inherit the Wind,
Oh
or
yeah.
did you?
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
To Kill a Mockingbird, I guess, as a
Oh
lawyer.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Somebody referred to me. One of my secretaries referred to me, or legal workers, as Gregory Peck one time. I'm like, wow, right on. Right on. Yeah, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, now you mentioned in terms of the Texas connection to John and Bill,
Right.
right? But when did you first hear about this case, the Gainesville Eight? Like, when did it first? Was that your initial understanding about the case? Was through the two clients, or did you?
I see. I'm fuzzy on this as far as the timing, but we had represented. I know John, and I think Cam had represented Bill um, in Austin
Mhm.
before the indictments. So they were, and we were VVAW lawyers in Austin
Yeah.
before the eight came about.
Okay.
So we were sort of a natural as far as being the Texas lawyers for those two. And I first heard about it. I was about 15,000 feet up in the mountains backpacking, and my law partner Cam said, "We need to go to Gainesville." And, and so, oh, really? And there'd been some grand jury work going on before that, so it wasn't like the indictment came down and we got into the case. We got into the case early on as far as representing John and Bill.
What other work had you done with VVAW prior to that?
Just representing them in demonstrations. I think John got a assault on a police officer case, and in the middle of the trial, one of our very, very close friends, he's a photographer, he came in with a picture, big 8x10 glossy, and it showed John on the ground with his head like this and the cop's foot on his head. And so our position in the case was that John was assaulting the cop's foot. And
Right.
we showed the prosecutor and then the judge the glossy and dismissed. That was cool.
Now, you talked earlier about, you having, people like Clarence Darrow as a role model, kind of coming into your own as a young progressive lawyer. Could you, in terms of Vietnam veterans against the war, I mean, initially, at least, not everyone in the progressive movement kind of understood the importance of Vietnam veterans against the war. Could you talk about why you felt like they were important, why they were a part of the progressive movement, and why they were something that needed to be defended?
Well, I think there was a mood at the time that some of the people that opposed the war were going to Canada, or they were hippies that, they were cowards or whatever. And the VVAW, these guys were over there and they got shot at, and they shot back, and they were combat veterans, and they were gaining a lot of credibility with Middle America, and certainly with me and everybody else. And I thought, right on with these guys. And I think the Nixon administration was getting freaked out too. They were gaining credibility. And I suppose this has been talked about. But I think that's why I supported them all the way, locally and then nationally. We were dealing with it locally in Austin.
In Austin. So you were seeing Vietnam veterans against war members being harassed.
Oh, yeah.
By the government. Can you talk about some of that in addition to you talked about the earlier case, but other patterns or other?
I just remember generally that we were the only lawyers in town that represented them, and just different things would come through. After 40 years, it's really difficult to remember each. I do remember that John Kniffin case, but and Cam represented Bill on something, and I just can't call it to mind. I've got a photograph of him walking out of the courthouse, but yeah, we were behind him all the way.
Yeah. When you really realized at a certain point you were coming to Gainesville and really having to prepare for how did you prepare for this case? I mean, you're going up against the United States government, and initially it seemed like, did you ever feel like, wow, we're really kind of outgunned here? Or did you?
I think we definitely had a feeling that this was the biggest case we were ever going to be in, or at least up until that point. And the case itself, after indictment, you may have better numbers on this than me, but I think we went on for a year before we went to court. Isn't that your recollection? I think.
Yeah, several months. Yeah.
I think maybe 11, 12 months before we got down. So we were drawn into it. I mean, we were going to Pensacola for pretrials, and we were going up to New York to meet with the Center for Constitutional Rights. Miami, we went to for some reason, in Gainesville for pretrials. So we were ready when the time came. I mean, we knew that it was going to be not guilty and we were going to have a trial. We had no idea it was going to take 30 days. But yeah, we knew this was a big case, and we were a small radical movement law firm, 3 lawyers, and we weren't making any money for sure. And we knew that if we took off for however long, it was going to be hard. And we had one guy stay home and mind the store, and they were very kind to us here in Gainesville, gave us a place to stay and fed us and whatnot. But I mean, it wasn't like we were getting a big fee or anything.
Yeah.
We didn't care. We wanted to do what was right. And
Yeah.
we stuck with it. Yeah.
What kind of preparation did you have to do with the defendants, with the people who were being charged with these things? Did you work with them beforehand?
Yeah, I think at some point the judge, well, you probably know more than I do about who went pro se. I mean, I know Scott went pro se.
Yeah.
Did Bill and John? I think.
A couple of them did, but
Yeah. See, that's the same recollection I have. But the judge made sure that each defendant had a lawyer, and Peter Mahoney, who I just saw out here, gave a big hug to, and yeah, you're my lawyer. Yeah, you're, and so I think at some level we did have to know what their participation was, but in general it was one for all and all for one. I mean, even the pro se people, would talk to us and, okay, who's going to cross-examine Lemur, or who's going to cross-examine Emerson Poe or Becker, and so we worked all that out, like with each defendant. How did you figure in with what Lemur is going to say when we cross-examine him? So yeah, we dealt with it in that way, dealing with the defendants.
Did you ever feel intimidated? I mean, here you were going up against, in a way, the United States government. I mean, did you feel like, wow, this is going to be tough for us? Did you feel like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, was there a sense of confidence before the trial, or was there kind of wait and see, or?
I think it was because we had so much talent that I never felt intimidated. If I'd have come down here all alone from Austin and been one lawyer in there defending him, I'd have been scared to death. But we had the Center for Constitutional Rights. I had a lot of confidence in my law partner. Larry Turner just popped up out of nowhere. We needed somebody locally, and he just grew all the way through the trial and became a real figure in the defense. And as time went on, it became pretty clear to me that the government didn't have jack shit for a case, and that gives you a lot of confidence. And I wasn't that impressed with the prosecution, to tell you the truth. I thought the judge was pretty much prosecution oriented, but I felt real good about it.
Tell me about the prosecution. I mean, what kind of people were there? I mean, I've heard mixed things. I mean, they were described in an earlier interview as kind of outsiders coming in from the north, but.
Well, Guy Goodwin, yeah, outsiders coming in from the north, but Jack Caruth he's a southern good old boy. He's kind of more South Georgia than North Florida, and he sounded more like Texas than some hotshot federal prosecutor to me anyway, the way he talked. And he did his best, I guess. He believed that the indictments were true and that they were guilty, but I think he was way behind the times,
Did you ever feel during the course? I mean, one of the things that one of the interviewees said earlier was the sense of kind of fear during the trial, like there may be some intimidation going on. Were you aware of any of that, or did you?
But by the government?
Yeah, by federal agents or phone tapping has been referred to.
Oh, I think by the time we got into it, we knew so much about the agent provocateurs and tapping, and then the FBI in the broom closet. And yeah, we knew they were could do about anything. Yeah, but we didn't trust them at all.
When did you find out about the FBI in the broom closet? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, uh, the government. We had so many files. I mean, we had boxes and boxes of files, and we were carrying them back to where we were being put up back for. So we asked the judge for a room in the courthouse so we could have post-trial conferences day by day and a meeting place for we had 6 lawyers and 8 defendants, and all these files, and he gave us a room about half the size of this, and so we met there, and I think it was Pete Mahoney and another defendant were standing like here. I think I was sitting on the floor, and they heard something, and they went, but then keep talking, and I looked over and I saw 4 legs over there, and so I forget who it was, might have been Pete, walked out, and caught these guys, and they maintained that. That Carruth, the prosecutor, had reported something wrong with his line, and he wanted them to check all the lines, and that was their defense. Well, we immediately went racing to the judge that day, or they might have been that day. Court was closed, but the judge was probably in his office, and he just dismissed it. He couldn't declare a mistrial. We've been messing with this thing for 13 months, and we were probably 2 weeks into the trial. So he said, "Oh, no, don't worry about that." And so that was the end of that. But we knew that they were spying on us. Yeah. Yeah.
When the trial started, I wonder if you could talk. We've read Scott Camille's opening statement to the court, but in your recollection, how did the trial start off in terms of the coverage, like outside of the courtroom, the atmosphere inside? Was it tense? Was it?
I don't really remember the people there, of course, behind us, and all of us are focused on the judge. I remember the marshals. Um, the marshals were keeping everything in order. I mean, it wasn't like the Chicago 7 or the Chicago 8. That was pretty wild. I mean, they had the Panthers in there and everything. But I don't remember much going on in the courtroom. I know outside the courtroom, all the media was doing a lot of interviewing. I'm saying the New York Times was covering it on a daily basis, and the Miami paper and the Gainesville paper and whatnot. So there was a lot of action outside, and then there was the camps, where all the people were gathered. And I forget who came down. Tom Hayden, I think, showed up, and some folk singers, probably Pete Seeger and Jane Fonda, maybe, I don't know. And the Berrigan brothers. There was a good crowd going on, and at night we did a lot of singing, and so a lot of it was relieving tension and drinking beer. But basically, we had a job to do, and we knew it was serious. This is serious business, because these 8 guys could spend a lot of time in prison.
How did the legal team work together? I mean, you had a partner, but then you also had to work with other lawyers as well. I mean, how were you able to kind of work as a team?
As I recall, Marty Stavis, I mean, if you can say there was a lead counsel, and there really wasn't, but if you can say that one person was really not calling the shots, but that was lead counsel, so to speak, it would have been Morty. Now, there may be Larry and Nancy may have another opinion on that, but and there was disagreements. You had John and Bill disagreeing, and then Scott had his views, and they were going pro se, and then Marty, who had successfully won the appeal on the Chicago 8 case, Chicago 7, he had a view. So we did a lot of talking, and there were a lot of different views, but I think when we got in the courtroom, it was pretty clear that we were all one team.
How did with Scott going pro se? I mean, did that affect your strategy with the other clients who were being represented by legal counsel, or was that?
I don't really recall. I know that legally, strategically, it was an advantage because it gave him a second shot at cross-examination after we had cross-examined. And then he, I think, on the final argument, he gave his final argument. He did his opening statement, and then we would get to do the same thing. Now, it could also be looked at maybe from a negative standpoint that he didn't want us, he just wanted to do it himself. But I think Scott knew what was happening, and we were one for all and all for one, in my view.
How would you, not trying to get you to have to rank Scott's performance or anything, but compared to other trials or other cases that you've seen where people represented themselves, I mean, how would you assess Scott's performance?
Oh, on a 1 to 10, he was a 10 all the way. He felt so much. I mean, you know Scott's history and the whole history, and wounded, and he felt so strongly about the fact that they were being mistreated in every way possible by the government that he became very eloquent, I think, and was articulate in his argument and his cross, and his performance was good. And it could, somebody like that could get out of hand too. I mean, in the Chicago 7, they had to gag, who am I trying to say? The black defendant.
Right. I know you're talking about.
Seal,
yeah.
Yeah.
Bobby Seal, yeah.
And no, we didn't have any of that. I mean, there were times that the judge would overrule everything we did, and then when we did the power salute, and the judge held us in contempt, and he couldn't put us in jail because then the trial would be over. So he waited. I guess all the lawyers. When I got back to Austin, he filed a grievance with our local grievance committee, and our grievance committee. Austin's a pretty liberal place. They didn't do anything. But and that was fun. I mean, I know it was a serious moment, but it was fun.
Was there any? I know in the case of the prosecution, when you look at it, I mean, it's full of contradictions, and it seems to be. But in our earlier interview, someone mentioned the fact that there never really is an open and shut case. There's always the possibility that it could go the wrong way. Was there ever any moments of doubt, or you thought, oh shoot, maybe they have something on us?
Well, as I recall, we had, and Scott knows more about this than I do, but we had prepared a post-Vietnam syndrome defense if we thought we needed one. Like if these guys did anything wrong, or if we thought that the government may have convinced the jury that they were guilty of something in the indictment, then it's because we got all screwed up in Vietnam, post-Vietnam syndrome. But after the government finished their case, they haven't proven the case. We don't need to do anything. They've failed. And I think it was a good decision, because if you start putting people on the stand or something, it can backfire. So we closed. We didn't put on any evidence. Said defense rests. Move to final argument. So.
Could you get a read on the jury at that time during the course of the trial, or did you not just not worry about that? Or
We had as you probably know, jury selection methods were changing very rapidly, and we may have been one of the first major cases to use jury selectors to select the jury, where you bring in psychologists and people, statisticians, and they do a complete number on jury selection. You're probably aware of that. And we felt like we had a really good jury. I remember after the jury was impaneled and we saw the people on it, we were in the room and, we got a good jury.
what made a good jury though? Why was it a good jury?
I think there was a level of intelligence that you get. I mean, when you've interviewed people and you know something about them. This is a university town. I wouldn't consider it a particularly liberal jury, but I think we had a thinking jury, and I think they just said, the government, they've just blown this thing way out of shape. That these guys really didn't do anything. They just wanted to demonstrate against the war. They didn't want to shoot anybody or blow up anything. And so I think it was a good jury and a good decision not to put on any evidence. No necessity for it.
Do you think did that surprise the prosecution at that point? Do you think, or I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I'm trying to figure out, was there ever a point when the prosecution, and again, this is very subjective what I'm going to ask you, was there a point when you felt like the prosecution realized that it hadn't made its case and that it had just kind of was overconfident? Or, in other words, did these guys really know what they were doing?
I think Jack Carew thought all along that they were guilty, and he put on the best case he could, and I just think he failed. He didn't get it. Scott will know this, but I think they listed, you're supposed to list your witnesses beforehand, each side, and I think they listed 40 prospective witnesses. And as I recall, they put on 27. So that I guess at some point they felt like, well, we put on enough to convict these people. I think he was so government initiated that he felt like, well, these are a bunch of hell-raising hippies that took the law into their own hands and conspired to do something wrong, and the jury just didn't buy it. They didn't buy the level of violence that the prosecution was presenting, that they conspired to do.
Taking kind of a step back from the case, because you had this incredible legal career, how would you place the Gainesville Eight in terms of other major cases of its kind, or does it stand alone?
I would say it's right at the top. The Chicago 7 is the one that I think is more likely to come up as the major case. But I think Gainesville 8 is right behind it. And then there was the Camden 28. And there were several during that time, I think, that are all significant. And they all represented the same thing. It's the government clamping down on dissent. But I think the Gainesville 8, we tried some other cases locally in Houston and El Paso, and my other law partner tried a lot of the cases in the Native American, the ones in Nebraska.
Yeah. And
we tried civil rights and anti-war cases, basically. What we were doing, but this case obviously was the biggest one we ever tried that I was involved in.
People have talked about the Gainesville Eight as being kind of a product of its time in terms of connections to the war and to Vietnam and Watergate. Did you have a sense at that point that the trial was connected to these broader social issues, or were you so focused on the trial that you?
Well, I think Watergate was right in there. And we always felt like Guy Goodwin, who was really the person behind it all. I mean, he was not in court, but he was calling the shots. And we felt like he was doing this in a lot of ways to cover up Watergate, to take the nation's attention off Watergate and to show that the anti-war movement was involved with violence.
What importance in kind of looking back in retrospect? I mean, you could imagine what would have happened if you would have lost the case. I mean, that's kind of a counterfactual, but what was the importance of winning the case to these broader social movements that you saw yourself as being a part of? Why did it matter that you won the case?
Well, I think it gave credence to the fact that these combat veterans had come back and said, this war sucks. And we had a jury of just 12 citizens from a southern town saying, yeah. Because, I mean, these were heavy charges. All these guys could have gone to prison for a long, long time. They just threw out the whole thing in 3 hours after a 30-day trial. And I think it gave a lot of credence to the whole anti-war movement. Now in Chicago, there were convictions, but they were all reversed on appeal. And I think maybe people were thinking, if there were convictions in this case, that we get them reversed on appeal, because there were a lot of objections, a lot of error in the case on the part of the prosecution. The judge was very conservative, and he'd overrule everything we did and sustain everything they did, you know. And you know, so I think maybe I wasn't thinking that way, but I think maybe some of the legal team was thinking, well, we can always win this on appeal, but no, we don't want to win this on appeal. We want to win it now in court. And I think when those verdicts came back, boy, there's a lot of joy out there, inside the courtroom and outside. I mean, just not some guy having to go to the joint. I mean, that's enough to scream and rave about, but it just, as I say, it just gave affirmation to the whole anti-war movement and the fact that this war was wrong. And it had been going on for a long time. We're talking about 1973. So we're not in 67, 68, that people were really getting weary of Vietnam. And this is just another, you know, stroke.
Yeah. What did you take personally from the trial? What did you learn? I mean, how were you able to, was it a set of experiences that you used to kind of build your career further in terms of you know, kind of what you learned as a lawyer, or was it?
Well, I, you know, wish I could say I was still fighting the good fight. I am in a way. I still feel that way. We continued to do, well, the war ended soon after that. We continued to do anti-war work and civil rights work and some environmental work. So we remained far to the left. This was clearly the biggest case that we had. And I kept it up. And then really by the 80s was doing pretty much straight criminal law, and was involved locally in some radical cases. But as time went on, I started acting and doing theater in the evenings. And by 1989, I quit practicing law and became a full-time Screen Actors Guild lawyer. And my heart and sentiment is still with the movement, but I'd been a lawyer for 29 years, and I've been an actor for 28. So it all worked out.
If you were going to create a screenplay about the Gainesville Eight, what would it look like? Who would you choose to play? I mean, how would you?
I would be Judge Arno. I am way too old to play myself, but I would love to play Judge Arno because he was an old man to me then, and I'm an old man now. So I would love to be him with his nicotine-stained fingers and overruled. You know, yeah. I could be Arno. If you want to make a film on it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, who would play you?
I don't know. I was 35. I don't know. I just got through doing a film with Jack Black, and that'd be a great guy to play.
He's a character.
He was great.
What film did you do with him?
Bernie. It was a film that he was in with McConaughey and Shirley MacLaine, and he was the defendant. I was his lawyer. I was playing a lawyer, and McConaughey was the prosecutor, and Shirley MacLaine was the murder victim. Jack Black shot her. It's based on a true story. It happened in East Texas, and Linklater. I don't know if you know Rick Linklater. He's a director. Yeah. He directed it and wrote it. So yeah, we get Jack Black. He could play me. That'd be fine. As long as I get to do Arno.
Exactly. Wow. Is there anything, Brady, we haven't talked about that you want to state for the?
I think a lot of people have been saying it, that all of the whistleblowing that's going on today with Snowden and Manning and whatnot, 40 years ago, these guys were the whistleblowers. It wasn't the same, but it was the same idea that you come back from Vietnam and you say, this is wrong. What we're doing over there is wrong. And just blowing the lid on the government. And I think that's happening today in a way, so I would say that's relevant.
I just want to know what the day-to-day during the trial, like how you all were strategizing about who was going to go first, or was it sequential? Was there the lawyers? I mean, would you just object if you wanted to object, or?
Yeah, it's hard to recall that, but I think we would all just pop up when we thought it was relevant. I know as the trial went on, Larry really kind of grew into the defense team because at that point he was not really part of the whole Radical Center for Constitutional Rights, and he'd pop up, or I'd pop up, or Marty Stavis would get up a lot, and then of course if you were pro se you could object. Our objections never went very far with Arno, but if they were done right, the jury would hear them and get a sense of what we didn't like about the witness's testimony.
So you don't want to ask about what some of the witnesses called? Because I know what's in the book, but about the ridiculousness of how confident, I just can't believe y'all could be so confident that the jury would see that it wasn't proven. I mean, I read in the book that their witnesses were contradicting each other. They're saying so-and-so did it, and then pointing fingers, and I mean, why did you think it was so unproven, their case?
Well, a lot of it was weapons that they never did, prove that people were showing up with rifles and whatnot that were going on within these meetings of the VVAW where the agents provocateurs would come in and say, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And that just didn't come out. And Lemur was the main undercover agent, I thought, anyway. Emerson Poe and Becker. They just weren't very impressive. And I think the jury saw them as being sort of weasels, which, I mean, that's what they do. You know, they sneak in and spy. And I think the jury saw that. And it just didn't add up to us. And that's why no defense, no need to do it. It's a risk, but, you know, it's something we all finally agreed on.
Did anyone, in the final agreement though, was there any second thoughts, like, well, maybe we should, you know, or?
I don't recall, I really don't. I do recall, as I said before, that I think if we were really pushed into it, we felt like we were really trapped or something, that we were going to put on this post-Vietnam syndrome. You know, that you've got psychiatric problems.
Yeah. But that was kind of an abeyance. That was something.
I think so. I think Scott would probably know more about that, but I think that was a possibility, but it never, I mean, by the time they rested, we just said they hadn't made a case. Let's argue it and do the final arguments.
What do you think? This question just came to mind, you know, thinking about, because you mentioned Manning and Snowden, and of course, we just finished with a really intense trial of Manning. What did you think about that trial? Did you have a chance to?
I just felt like, just aside from the legality and the indictment and everything, I just felt sorry for him. I really did. Just looking at him and feeling, I just don't think he has an evil bone in his body. I mean, I don't think he was, I think he thought he was doing the right thing. Just, it's my impression of it. My heart goes out to him. I just feel like it's a sad situation for him. I really don't know that much about the information that he gave out, or whether it was, you know, against security or what, but, you know.
Yeah. What's the, I know this is kind of an over broad question, and you don't have to answer it, but I mean, what's the state of like progressive radical lawyering now? Is it still, do you feel like there's still a tradition that's going on, or do you think that, because you definitely, you know, you mentioned Clarence Darrow. I mean, that's a legal, you know, tradition that you can kind of look back on, right?
Yeah.
And, do you think that's being carried on, or did it kind of die out, or is it?
I wish I knew. I really don't. I know that there are lawyers, I know in Austin and other places, that are really doing a lot of police brutality work, fighting that. Discrimination work, racial discrimination. I know a lot of lawyers are dealing with that. They're out there. As I say, I haven't really been lawyering, but no, there's some good people out there doing good work, I think. And environmental, especially, you know, that seems to be a big problem.
Yeah. Big time. All right. Well, Brady, well, thank you for the interview. It's been really
Thank you.
enlightening.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
I hope I've been some help.
No, incredibly helpful, definitely. And
I'll have a big file out there tomorrow if you want to look through anything.
yeah, we'd really appreciate that. And
You know Nancy Miller in the book she wrote?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I sent that file to her when she was compiling the book, and I think she used some of it in there.
Okay.
A lot of it you probably already have, the press and whatnot.
Well, it's good. I mean, clippings files are really important because number one, it saves us a lot of time. And if someone already has a clippings file together, it's just incredibly.
I got the words to the song too.
Okay. Yeah.